Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. It has been another unsettled week across the UK, but is there any sign of a change as we head through the next 2 weeks? And in particular, could we see something a little bit wintry like on this photograph? Well, I'm going to start as usual by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 14th. And at the outset, it's a very similar picture to the one which we've had in place for recent weeks. There is an Atlantic flow pushing across the country, so that's keeping things quite changeable. And as I run the animation, what we see is a little feature pushes up from the southwest. It becomes quite a nasty area of low pressure. It's going to be bringing cloud, rain, and potentially strong winds, especially to the southern half of the UK. There is some uncertainty once more about the exact track which that's going to be taking, and that will determine where the strongest winds are going to be, whether they affect southern parts of the UK or perhaps northern France. But running this through to its conclusion, what we see is a ridge of high pressure moves across the UK, so it's dry for a time, but into the weekend, further wet and windy weather, and more of a southwesterly flow develops, so temperatures probably rising for a time. And then into next week, well, there are signs of a significant change. High pressure starts to build and it's pushing in from the Atlantic. It brings the potential for drier periods, more settled periods, an increasing risk of frost and fog, perhaps, but much will depend on exactly where that becomes centred. And as I'll discuss later, there is quite a lot of uncertainty about how it will develop. Here's the jet stream and air temperature sequence associated with the same computer model run. The mottled shading shows the jet stream there just tracking across the southern half of the UK. And as I run this, not a great deal changes, at least in the short term, but there is more of a southwesterly tilt there beginning to develop for a time. And at the end, we can see the high pressure area building northwards towards and across the UK, and the jet stream perhaps beginning to migrate away northwards as well. So signs of more settled conditions perhaps there towards the end. And of course, this is just one computer model run. Temperatures, I don't think are going to be a big factor through the first week. Maximums here on Wednesday, double figures in southern and central regions, just a little bit colder as you head northwards. Forwards to Saturday, a little bit lower on the whole, but there are signs there of it starting to turn milder in the southwest. And if I go forwards to Sunday, temperatures are now lifted, 13s, 14s, perhaps 15s, so very mild at this point across much of England and Wales, still a little bit cooler there in the north, and that's when we're starting to pull up that air from the southwest, but it probably won't hang around for too long. Overnight lows through the first week, they will be varying. Patchy frost is a possibility on some nights. This shows forecast lows at 06 GMT on Friday, the 17th of November. It's from the UKV model. Generally, the frost risk is going to be highest in the northern half of the United Kingdom, but even in the south, patchy ground frost is a possibility at times, especially earlier on. But as I said, I don't think that's going to be a big factor in the weather. Another thing to keep an eye on, though, is the possibility of another windy period. The MOGREPS G forecasts here are for London, and the period worth watching, I think, is between the 16th and the 18th. That's where the area of low pressure was shown on the GFS sequence to be pushing across southern Britain. And as I said, the exact track which it takes will determine the strength of winds. Quite a big spread here showing up. Some gusts in the London area over 50 miles an hour on one or two of the model runs there in the ensemble, but a significant number are showing calmer conditions, perhaps because they're taking that area of low pressure further south. But definitely keep an eye on the short range forecasts to see exactly how that develops. Later on, winds don't look as though they're going to be a big problem. Rainfall. The aggregates here for days 0 to 5 from the ECM and GFS models. All parts of the UK seeing significant amounts of rain through this period, if these model runs are correct. Forwards to days 0 to 10, the totals have increased, but it's notable that especially on the ECM chart on the left, the Orange shading is mostly in Western Scotland, Northwestern England, Northern Ireland and Wales. A very typical rainfall distribution pattern starting to reassert itself. As I mentioned in the update last week, actually, we're losing the signal for the wettest conditions to be in the south and the east, which was the case at the start of the month and often in October. So more of a normal rainfall distribution pattern here. With that said, all parts of the country seeing significant amounts. So how do the deterministic models compare with each other as we head towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS, which the animation was based on, and it has the area of high pressure building in from the Atlantic by Tuesday. The Canadian model, a little bit different. It's still quite a changeable pattern at this point with low pressure there, but there are indications of high pressure starting to show itself, and in the days which follow, potentially drier conditions developing, at least across the southern half of the UK. The German icon also following the same theme, high pressure starting to assert itself to the west, and in the days which follow, perhaps moving eastwards across the UK. The ECM, it's the same story, and finally, it's the UK Met Office global model also hinting there that high pressure will be starting to have at least some influence on the UK's weather towards the end of the first week. So taking them all together, what they are indicating, what they are highlighting is the possibility at last of things turning less unsettled, drier periods becoming more likely. It doesn't look particularly cold at this point with high pressure air building in from west, but not especially mild either. Perhaps an increasing chance of frost as we go through the second week if that high pressure builds in. Let's take a look. And of course, at this range, it's just about trends and probabilities. So is it going to be drier or wetter, colder or milder? Here's a 16-day GEFS ensemble plot for London. Air temperatures across the top half, well, above average mostly early on, but they are dipping as we head through week 2. So a cooling trend showing up there. In terms of rainfall, there are some spikes continuing to show up along the bottom half of the plot, but not very many of them. So suggesting drier periods are more likely than has been the case for much of the autumn. Actually, if you look at the snow row along the very bottom there, it reaches the heights of a 4. That's 4 out of 33. I think it's the highest I've seen for London so far this autumn. So a low chance of snow, but not completely out of the question as we head towards the end of the month. Maybe some colder air coming down from the north or the east. Just a chance of that happening at this stage. The 2-metre temperature data table for London also indicates the cooling trend. Light greens there, 6 to 10s early on. Still quite a lot of yellow, 11s to 15s, so the possibility of it being rather mild. But as we go through this period, the amount of light green increases. Also, a growing amount of dark green, runs going for maximums between 1 and 5 Celsius. So definitely some tentative indications here of colder conditions later on. Up to Manchester, it's a very, very similar story as was shown by the London plot. The 2-metre temperature data table for Manchester also goes in the same direction. There is a cooling trend here as we head towards the end of the second week. Up to Glasgow to complete the journey northwest, and really very consistent once more. The air temperatures there a little bit above the norm to start off with. Remember, these are at about 1,500 metres above sea level, but they dip. There is quite a big spread of solutions being shown, the individual runs diverging. All in all, though, the mean's reasonably representative, I think, because a lot of those runs which are going above the 30 and on then dip below it and vice versa. So possibly quite mixed, but all in all, not especially mild, not especially cold later on. And rainfall, well, a similar picture to the previous two charts. There isn't a big distinction here between the different localities. The 2-metre temperature data table for Glasgow also follows the same trends. It's a downwards one later on there, more dark green, even a little bit of light blue showing up there. Those are very cold runs, the wintry ones. Forecast maximums of 0 Celsius to -8. So -8. So those are really wintry ones, which start to appear as we head towards December and into January, of course, theoretically. Frost watch. Well, Nottingham, the amount of dark green grows, and also the amount of light blue there grows as well. So these are, of course, overnight lows rather than daytime maximums. So even though we've headed southwards, there is more light blue on this chart than there was on the Glasgow one. It suggests that the risk of frost will be growing through the second week. It's not unusual, of course, at this time of year. The days now very, very short, and we are heading towards the start of the meteorological winter. The same chart for Berkhamsted paints a similar story. It's the chance of frost a little bit lower than locations in the Midlands, but not especially so. So pretty average, I think, for the time of the year, but maybe later on there, dipping a little bit below it. Rainfall. These are the ECM ensemble probability charts showing the chance of 5 millimeters or more of rain falling on each of the given days. The key takeout here is that the driest conditions look like being in the south and the east. In fact, the chance of significant amounts of rain in those areas is lower than it has been for some time. The same pattern is shown on the charts for days 11, 12 and 13. So reasonably good agreement with the model output at this stage that high pressure will be having more influence through the second week. And here's the GEFS 10-day mean surface level pressure plot. So Friday, the 24th of November, it's a static snapshot rather than going forwards through time, but it's averaging out all of the individual runs of the ensemble. High pressure there building up from the south. That's the average of all of the individual runs. So it's pointing towards drier conditions being more likely in the southern half of the UK, more changeable or unsettled there across Scotland. But it's a big but. There is, when you average out all the individual runs, it doesn't necessarily tell the full story. So what I'm going to do is just show a few of the deterministic forecasts, the individual runs rather than the ensemble ones. Friday, the 24th of November, this is from the GFS. High pressure there building northwards towards Greenland and colder air moving down its eastern flank. The UK just on the boundary really between that cold Arctic plunge and the high pressure dominance. As I say, a lot of uncertainty about where this high pressure is going. The Canadian model at the same time, the high pressure there building across the southern half UK rolling. It's a very, very different story if we look northwest. If I just jump back, here we've got high pressure on the GFS going up towards Greenland. On the Canadian model, these dark purple shading areas there are indicating low pressure, essentially. It's not the sort of thing that you want to see if it's cold weather in the UK that you're hoping for. The GFS is much more favourable. With that said, it could be quite chilly at this point in parts of the UK, but the theme here is the high pressure to be slipping away southeastwards into continental Europe, and eventually you would expect milder southwesterlies to return. Finally, in the deterministic models, here is the European ECM at 10 days ahead. It's a little bit of a halfway house. High pressure there showing signs of building northwards in the mid-Atlantic, but I would expect areas of low pressure to be pushing across, and a fairly mixed picture across the UK. Certainly it doesn't look as though we would be seeing a direct northerly feed developing from this. I think low pressure would push in quite quickly from the west because the high pressure there isn't showing signs of being able to establish itself over Greenland, which is where, of course, the GFS was showing things going. So a lot of difference there between the three deterministic models. Where exactly the high pressure goes through the second week will have a big, big impact on the weather which we experience in the UK. The mean surface level pressure data table for York going through this period shows that high pressure is likely to be having more influence. It's not a given though, because Quite a few runs are still in the green and blue categories. Those are ones going for lower than the normal pressure. So I think, as I say, it's an uncertain picture through week 2 on balance. It looks like the chance of drier periods increases, maybe the risk of frost and fog does too, but the details are very much up for grabs. So to summarize, week 1, it's changeable with wet and windy periods. Temperatures close to the average early on, perhaps even a little bit below at times, but then it turns milder. And the chance of dry periods increases towards the end of the week as that high pressure area starts to become more influential. Week 2, dry periods are more likely than has been the case recently. Temperatures dip back to average after a rather mild start, and later on it could become chilly, so perhaps a little bit below the norm. Therefore, the risk of frost and fog is forecast to increase. But as I've been highlighting, much depends on exactly what happens to the area of high pressure, where it becomes centered. So there we have it, signs of a change. Unsettled through the first few days, but then high pressure becomes a bigger factor in the UK's weather. Where it's going to become centred, up to the northwest or down to the southeast, will in the long run have a very big impact on the weather which we experience. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this forecast video and found it useful. If you did, then as ever, please remember to hit the like button below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Also, remember to stay up to date with the day-to-day weather developments by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Finally, let me just say that I'm in the process of rebuilding my recording studio, so if things look a little bit different today, perhaps in terms of the colours and contrasts and the clarity of the video, then bear with me, because I should have the studio up to speed completely by this time next week. Thank you very much now. Bye.